All right, so we have Thomas on the line. He contacted me. He knows I'm always open to have a dialogue. I'm pretty political.
Okay.
Online, I usually stick to religious topics, but I've known Thomas at least via my podcast for a few months. I think he's a very decent individual, and I want to hear him out. So what do you propose, Thomas?
Well, first of all, I just want to say what I'm not saying, right? Even though I disagree with your views on this thing, I don't think it makes you a bad person. I don't think it makes you, any less observant of the commandments, right? In fact, you've been doing that longer than I have. I've barely scratched the surface there. So I would just start out with that, right?
What do you disagree with?
Okay, well, my disagreement is with your classical liberalism, as I would call it, right? You're a big advocate of freedom, the Constitution, things like that. Would I be incorrect to say that?
No, for sure I'm an advocate, yes.
Okay. I will say I could see the appeal of that, but I think such a system like that inevitably will undermine itself because that system gives freedom to the people who want to take it away. Ultimately, people complain. People like you'll often hear.
Hold on.
Well, hang on.
It gives freedom to people who want to take it away. Okay, go
Well,
ahead.
let me explain. All right.
Sure.
Okay, so people like Alex Jones or whatever. I'm not here to give my opinion on the guy. They'll say things like the answer to 1984 is 1776, and there's a lot of complaints about how we're now living in a tyranny or whatever. But there's not really a lot of things about how well we got here. Ultimately, if you give people freedom, you're enabling your enemies. You're enabling them to rise to the top and gain positions of political power. And so whatever rights or freedoms you had in the first place, they can just take them away. For example...
So what's the alternative? Tyranny spread out equally?
No, the alternative would be to have... What I want is some sort of religious state where people who live there would have to share certain shared values. And so
it essentially would have to be a religious state thrust upon everyone who doesn't want it, which in this case, if it would be Judaism, you're talking about 99.9% of the population. So it's basically tyranny in place of freedom for everybody, spread out equally.
Well, maybe. I mean, like I said, they could choose to leave. I'm happy.
Now, there's more order. I agree with you. If you force people to do things, if you are an authoritarian, there's for sure more order because everyone is moving in the same direction in a uniform manner. But people could be walking up the Brooklyn Bridge in a uniform manner too. It doesn't really mean anything. So unity and progress is not always the key if what you're progressing into is worse than what you started off as.
Well, you see, I disagree that it would be worse than what you start off with because, I think you'd have a population that's more moral at the very minimum.
Well, that's the same argument for Islamic republics. When
I would
1979, when the Iranian Revolution took over from the Shah, they felt that they were doing everybody a favor. Just like there's many people online, they think they're doing everyone a favor by scaring them into being religious. Some people would like to have the choice, even the choice to make the wrong decision. And I think that's something that God wants for us as well. I think when he brought the Jews out of Egypt, he wanted to give them the ability to fail if they wanted to. This whole thing that we're going to make sure you succeed, in some way give you a political lobotomy, that it's okay, we'll drag you across the finish line. That's essentially a left-wing idea, which is equality of outcome. So that for sure goes against everything in 1976.
I was going to say, regarding that, I would just defend the Islamic countries and say that I would say the people from those countries are generally, more moral than the people from these countries. They're not
more
perfect.
Holy or more moral? Are you making a distinction between morality and holiness? Because there's some things that are ceremonial precepts that are not moral ones.
Well, okay. I would agree that there's a distinction there. I'd say they're both. They do more ritual stuff than most Americans would, because of how their religion works. And also, I'd say they're better morally And like for example, in many of those countries, pornography wouldn't be as widespread, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know, like, or a lot of the other things people might complain about, like abortion or homosexuality. Like those things wouldn't be as widespread in those parts of the world. They exist there, but not to
You
the
have a
degree.
point, and I'll tell you where your point actually lies. This is the Torah model. Now, the reason the Torah model works is not because we have leadership that forces the populace to do this or that, but because God limited his rule to the borders of Israel. Only to the borders of Israel. If people didn't feel that they were up to the task, they were encouraged to leave, just not to drag everyone else down with them.
Right.
But this vision was never a global vision, because you can't force people to such extremes, even if religiously it's for their own good. If you're saying that, well, you know what, because I believe that the next life is more important than this life, you'll thank me later. I don't think that's the way God functions. It seems that the reason he limited it to the borders of Israel is because he wanted everyone else to come to the realization of the truth on their own. It says that they will look at Israel for keeping these laws and say what a wise and discerning people, i.e. that we should want to be like them or become them. But it should not be thrust upon everyone else. Yeah, continue.
Well, actually, you see, that would actually be an argument in favor of my point, where it says that there are wise and understanding people, that we should want that type of system for other parts of the world. Even if
I will have the freedom to want it. Because if they don't have the freedom,
hang on. Okay. I was gonna say, I would agree that other countries aren't required to have the systems. I fully agree with that. But they should want to have the systems, because like it says, that other countries will look at them and say, what a wise and understanding people. And part of those commandments, the way they were kept was under a sort of theocratical system. You know, in Israel, it was definitely a theocratical system.
But it wasn't thrust upon anyone, because anyone could have left whenever they wanted to leave. People could have left if they wanted to leave. That's it. I mean, this whole thing that
I'd allow people to leave. I have no problem with that.
You'll say, okay, fine. This is what we're doing now. Very similar to the Inquisition in Europe. Either convert, or i.e. buy into this philosophy, or leave. It's still a wrong system. Now, if you impose it in a state, then perhaps they can go to another state. But if you impose it on the whole country, as we've seen with the camps in World War II, that when you need a visa, you can't get a visa, right? Then you're essentially just creating prisons and just filling it up with dissidents or people who disagree with your philosophy. You've basically given birth to the whole concentration camp system. The Nazis also allowed a lot of people to leave in lieu of being put in concentration camps. There's actually a time period they gave for Jews to leave Germany, and the ones who couldn't find a way out found themselves in concentration camps.
Okay, well, hang on. I mean, I'm not sure where I'd want it implemented. I just would want it implemented somewhere.
Israel, I'm all for, if religious people get their act together, for forcing the Arabs not to become Jewish, but to become subservient to a Mosaic system, i.e. live some sort of Noahide or Ger Toshav existence, and living out Torah in the land as the Bible describes. I'm all for that. But it's the Islamic vision that says that it's a global vision. It's not a Jewish vision. The Jewish vision is for the land of Israel. Now, you could expand the borders of the land, and God willing, one day people should want to come to that system, but it should not be coerced on anyone, in my opinion.
Well, no. You see, I think you should have it outside of there. It doesn't necessarily mean there's no prohibition on implementing it outside of there.
There's no prohibition if King David wanted to expand it like he did the borders of Israel into Syria and keep on expanding. The biblical vision, the promise to Abraham, was that the borders would go all the way up to Mesopotamia, the Great River. But that doesn't mean it should be thrust upon people who don't want it. Now, if you conquer the land, if the people...
What if a country of people wanted that, though? What if a country of people outside of Eretz Israel wanted that?
Oh, then that's fine. Then I'd be happy if a country wanted to adopt the biblical standard as law. The truth is, I don't know how they would elect a leader, or a Sanhedrin or any type of court to run such a system, the last thing I want is for Chabad to be head of the Sanhedrin and for Satmar to be running the temple. But ideally, what?
I mean, you wouldn't necessarily have all the same characteristics what is it that Eretz Yisrael would have. It would have a lot. Well, I'm not sure.
Chabad's all over the world. Who speaks for Judaism the most other than Chabad?
Okay. No, I'm just saying, I'm not sure you could implement a Sanhedrin outside of Israel. I don't know how that would work.
Okay. Or any type of court. I don't think that you've thought this out through, just because realistically, it would be hard. It would be so difficult to implement. The system we have now works.
It wouldn't be difficult to implement. Christians have done it for centuries, and for the majority of Christian history, they had a system like that. I don't know why it would be
tyranny. In the vast majority of cases, it was a tyranny, and that gave birth to the Dark Ages in terms of tyrannical leaders who had their powers given to them by the church.
Well, they weren't given to them by the church per se. They had a hereditary monarchies. That isn't necessarily given to you by the church. That's just
the church endorsed your power. There's many times that the church took away that endorsement, and then these individuals went and created their own religions, and that's how the whole Anglican movement got formed. But the church basically sanctioned your existence as a king, and this is why people believed you in terms of God and country. I choose to opt out of that. I think that the system we have is not perfect, but is better than anything else that we've ever seen on this planet. Now, clearly,
that system that you're criticizing, though, it lasted longer than the system we have today, though. Like it has a more proven track record than the one we have today, though.
Proven track record of existence or a proven track record of working?
Well, both.
Only because something is older doesn't mean it works better.
Right, but no, I'm responding to what you said before. You were saying that basically, you could never make it work, but those are examples of it working. That's my point.
It wouldn't work in America. I think Americans love freedom too much. Perhaps in New Zealand, Australia, England, where freedom is not a tenet of the system.
That I might have to agree with you on. I think Americans do love freedom too much.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a good thing. I rather this type of government than a theocratic one. I mean, I think it's great that people could choose to live in a state that's more religious, less religious, just because it aligns more with their philosophy. If you're religious, live in the Bible Belt. If you're secular, live in Manhattan or Los Angeles. Now, the bigger problem I have are judges rewriting the Constitution and acting like real authoritarians. But that's for another discussion. But, all right, so there.
Okay.
We have,
was it at least
20 minutes? Fine. Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate the discussion. I'm pretty sure.
At least?
I think it's educational for sure. I mean, people are going to ask questions and